aye. And against, carried. Thank you. Great to see you again.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Okay, we have no local board input. We have no extraordinary items. The next item up is approval of shareholder comments on Auckland Transport Draft Statement of Intent. So Trudy and Claire, welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Trudy Father tōku ingoa. I've been working on the draft statement of intent for Auckland Transport and quarterly reporting as Claire was away in April, so we're pleased to have her back today. So first, where we are in the SOI process, Council's expectations for Auckland Transport were approved by this committee in February, and following that a letter of expectations was sent by the Mayor, which included direction common for all CCOs and those specific for Auckland Transport. Chair Richard Leggett introduced the draft SOI to this committee at your meeting last month, and then there was a joint committee workshop on the 16th of April which discussed proposed shareholder comments on draft SOIs for all CCOs. The report on the agenda today reflects the workshop discussion. So firstly, the general feedback for all CCOs is that their final SOIs align with annual plan decision making, that they reflect the Better Value Projects program, commitment to group shared services, set out milestones and key capital programs to report on, and include in the SOI a summary of how the needs and aspirations of Māori have been reflected in the CCO's planned activities and deliverables. So on specific feedback for Auckland Transport, I'll take the report as read and just provide a short summary of the changes requested to the SOI proposed as Council shareholder comments. In the strategic alignment and key policy section, the proposed feedback is that Auckland Transport and their SOI show alignment between Kia ora Tamaki Makaurau and Ka Tupu Ka Wana, which is their new Achieving Māori Outcomes plan, that they make reference in the appropriate sections to the transport emissions reduction pathway, and that they expand on how they're addressing the challenges of resilience and reducing harm. For transport reform, the proposed feedback is that the current area in the work program on governance and advocacy should be refocused to preparing for transport reform and include commitment to delivery of any early reform actions. To effectively support Council in their reform work, Auckland Transport will need to share information early and on a timely basis and develop the RLTP 2027 working with the Council. And with changes to transport decision-making being signalled through the reform, it is particularly important that the SOI reflect the need for engagement of local and regional elected members on key issues and projects at the very earliest stage. So for the rest of the SOI work program over the next 3 years, a summary of the proposed feedback includes, firstly, clicking that project milestones are included for all the deliverables listed in the SOI, that specific deliverables are included for how Auckland Transport intends to improve how it listens to and responds to Aucklanders, that Council seeks a lift in deliverables and targets for dynamic lanes, special vehicle lanes and smart intersections, and seek measurable deliverables to reduce costs and impacts of TTM and set out the pathway to full implementation of the New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management. More detail on CRL infrastructure works and enablement and network integration activities is sought. And Council wants to see deliverables on Auckland Transport's work to reduce its cost to the Council and their activity to grow non-rates revenue. And deliverables on the length of cycle lanes and new footpaths are sought to be included in the SOI. So lastly, on performance measures and targets, noting that Auckland Transport will provide a supplement to the SOI which sets out definitions and methodology for performance measures. Auckland Transport had removed the operational greenhouse gas emissions reduction measure from their draft SOI. This is due to Audit New Zealand's concerns around the accuracy of Scope 3 emissions reporting, both in the baseline and in the actual results, which are reliant on supplier information that is not always accessible or available. So the proposed feedback is to request an operational emissions measure in the SOI that includes Scope 1 and 2 emissions. There's also feedback proposed on several of the targets. This includes asset condition, seeking that the target for the proportion of critical assets in poor or very poor condition is maintained at a minimum of 17% over the period of the SOI. On customer perceptions, Council does not want to expect to see a reduction in the target trajectory from the current SOI. And in addition, Council seeking that the work noted to develop a new measure in this space should wait until after transport reform is progressed. On public transport boardings, Council would not like to see a reduction in the current target trajectory, particularly in the context of the CRL opening next year. On bus priority delivery, as mentioned earlier, Council expects that the target would be increasing over the period of the SOI, as there's a strong focus in this area. For cycle counts, Council would like to see a retention of the targets in the current SOI. And on Māori procurement, Hukura strongly advocates that the target trajectory percentage of procurement spend through Māori-owned businesses is retained as in the current SOI. So when I say that, I mean the 24-27 SOI, which that would set the procurement spend at 4% for next year, rising to 5% thereafter, rather than the 3% target set in the draft SOI. And we also note that Auckland Transport have included a new measure on the timeliness of program delivery, which is welcomed. So that's thank you, Chair. That's my summary of the proposed shareholder comments. But happy to take questions.
Thank you, Trudy. And just a reminder, this is all about our comments. So, someone like to move? Thank you, Chris. Second up. Thank you, Lotu. Okay, so questions, Chris.
So, thanks, Trudy and Claire. So just want some clarification. So when you're saying that the council wants these measures, say, cycle count measure, to go back to what was originally proposed, you're not mentioning how Auckland Transport might do that, and in other areas also that are where they're financially constrained. How do you think Auckland Transport will be able to deliver those on those measures, on those outcomes, unless there's a corresponding increase in the allocation of budget? Are you saying that there's an expectation from the council to achieve all that, ABC, but there shall not be, but do it within your envelopes, do it within your OPEX and your CAPEX?
We do note that the cycle counts above and exceeding the current SOI targets, so it does seem somewhat surprising that Auckland Transport have reduced the target trajectory for next year, and noting Council's direction in the letter of expectation, which is about sort of low cost delivery of infrastructure to support public transport and cycling.
Look, with Malahat on the board, I've quizzed this at the board very hard, and it has become very evident to me that it is funding related, and that's why the note is there on that reply from the chair, note 8, it is funding related. So I'm really struggling as a councillor to be saying change this number but there is no funding to do it. It is very clear. This has been well examined at the board. It is a funding constraint. You can only do so much.
I think, as it says in the report, we do question why there is a reduction in the target. We accept that there is a funding change, but as it is already exceeding the current SOI target in their latest quarterly report, is it actually still delivering even within the current funding? And we're seeking clarification and I guess a bit further justification that the measure reduction is actually appropriate. And it may have been discussed and canvassed at the board, but it's not evident to council. We haven't seen.
So the staff have obviously, prior to coming to this meeting, you would have lots of exchanges, talking to lots of people. So when you ask those questions of Auckland Transport senior staff, what did they say about that?
Apologies, I have been away. I think what we have signalled to them is that they've said that they are going to provide this additional addendum, which will be clearer on the methodology and the rationale, and we have said, well, we'd like to work with you and understand that more. We are questioning it at this point. We haven't seen that yet.
Sorry, you haven't seen what?
So there was, my understanding is that there is going to be more rationale provided on the methodology and the assumptions and how things are calculated, because there have been some confusion on that in the past, and we have been asking for that. But I haven't yet seen that document.
Okay, and the question of funding, what was their response to the point that's been raised or put on record by the chair in his reply, under note 8, I'm repeating that, about funding? What was the reply to that? So I'm putting you on the spot here, but this is really important.
We lacked the detail on how the funding changes have flowed through into the proposed changes on cycle counts. There, as you say, there's quite a high-level note, but we've not received the detail that sits behind that.
And you have asked for it. There's a record. If I went in Lagoimid, the exchanges between your office and Auckland Transport, I would find record of discussion asking for the rationale, the funding detail, etc.
Well, I think what you'll find is once we have your shareholder feedback approved that we do want to clarify and seek this question, we will then have it on record that, we are formally asking. At the moment, we have had informal conversations around the targets and the measures, but the shareholder feedback in the letter is saying we are seeking further clarification on this, and that is where we will get that.
Okay, I'll ask Auckland Transport when they come for their section to explain their point of view, because I think if we can just examine this particular area, we probably will understand other areas of Auckland Transport's work as well and the challenges.
And just to remind in the process, we will be coming back after we have had these discussions to approve a final SOI. And in that SOI, we might say, look, we've had these conversations, we are comfortable and we support Auckland Transport's final. But at the moment, we have not got that information. And so we are seeking further clarification based on the evidence that we've got in the quarterly reporting. They are exceeding additional targets, and so we would like to understand that further.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie.
Thanks. Something I'm trying to understand is something that I raised when they came to the April trick around this, and acknowledging that what we're doing today is we're discussing in public and confirming our comments back to them. Is that, I raised some stuff around safety, and I'm concerned that I don't feel like that has been captured sufficiently in the report so far. So I'm wanting, I guess, a bit of clarity from you as officers as to what your intention is around our comments on an increased focus in safety based on the conversations to date. Thanks. In terms of the comments we're taking back to AT.
Safety is included in their in their number 6 focus area, and we have sought to for them to provide milestones on their delivery in this work. Apologies if we didn't pick up appropriately your particular concerns, councillor.
Is that the only comment that we're going back to them with at this point?
We've also highlighted in their strategic alignment section, they they outline the challenges in the LTP, and one of them is around reducing harm, and we've asked for some further detail in that commentary on their work and focus.
Okay, I guess I just want to indicate, Chair, I would like to see us give stronger feedback in that space. I wonder if it's appropriate to seek an amendment, putting that in, but happy to have a little chat to you about how we might do that. One of the things I raised it's not a question, so I'll stop now.
Okay, Angela.
Thank you. My question was just following on from Councillor Darby, so it might be in the information that you don't have. In terms of the funding for the cycling, do you know if it includes the climate action targeted rate? Is that one of the components that makes up how we fund the emission reduction and the DSI targets from cycling numbers?
As the draft SOI didn't have the financials in it, I can't answer that question. Auckland Transport would need to provide.
We're really interested to understand it because there's been a question around where does the money come from? Well, the money comes from the climate action targeted rate and from reprioritisation of existing budgets, which have been challenged because we needed to align with the government's policy statement. So I'm interested in that climate action targeted rate component, as it is a risk because local boards can turn down the project. A local board turned down $14 million for a safe cycleway. If Auckland Transport thought that that was going to help their numbers, it certainly wasn't. So I'm interested to know if that's part of the component of the makeup of those targets. Thank you.
Morris.
Yeah, look, it's reasonably fortuitous that Bike Auckland came and presented, and I've just been looking through some of their slides. They're quite strong in every one of their slides that TERP needs to be included in the SOI, and I'm pretty much agreeing with them. TERP's the biggest expenditure that we've ever put onto any CCO. It's just huge, but we haven't funded any of it. And we're going to expect them within 4.5 years, remember that, 4.5 years to 2030, we're going to expect them to have met, I would have originally said heroic assumptions. Now I'm going to call them ludicrous. We've asked them to do a 550% increase in the number of public transport users. This council voted on it in August 2022. I wasn't here, but you voted on it. We've asked them to take the number of people in micro-mobility from 1% of the travelling public to 13%.
You got a question on this one?
Well, the question comes like this. In any business where you've got a target in 4.5 years, why is there not a table of what that percentage is for each of the years through to 2030? So we know what it looks like. Because we're going to hold AT to account for deliverables, and yet we are saying nothing about how it's to be funded. We're saying nothing about how impossible, absolute halving of the vehicle kilometres for the private car fleet. Well, if we're genuinely serious about it, and Bike Auckland seem to think we should, why are we not including a specific set of tables, 26, 27, 28, 29 and 30, and what those percentages have to be? Because otherwise, I think it's disingenuous. I'm really keen to know why we haven't put those TERP targets in here.
No, you turned off your microphone.
Through the chair, This is 80's SOI, so we don't put in their targets and the measures. They recommend them to us and we comment on them. What we have said in the feedback is that they should make reference to TERP. We haven't said that they should achieve the targets or stuff. There is stuff, as I understand it, in TERP that can be implemented and considered. And so, you know, we're asking AT to come back on that. TERP is a council position and a policy position. If you do not wish to include that, then that is you as a shareholder's decision to make. We as officers are just noting what is council's position, an agreed position, and asking for alignment and consistency and reference. That decision is yours. We do have Imran from the Transport Strategy team available to, if there are specific questions around TERP, who could come to the table and answer them.
I guess to try to get that question really clear, if we're going to say to any organisation, we expect you to deliver on the following, and it's very specific what we're asking of you, then why is it not in the statement of intent how, over the next 4.5 years, they can achieve that, and what funding will be required for them to achieve it, and what budget we will provide them to do it? Otherwise, it's a pipe dream. I could make up even bigger numbers and say, we want you to be 5 million%, and it does nothing. It doesn't even rustle the leaves on the tree if we don't have it in their statement of intent.
So we have asked to have it in their statement of intent. We have asked to have reference to it.
But what does that mean? Referencing, just say, oh, and by the way, there's TERP. That can be referencing it. I'm talking about hard numbers, specific targets that we've set that, in my view, and I'm happy to take anyone on bets for this, not even close to doable. But I hear AT regularly saying, well, of course, we have to be cognizant of TERP because we've been given this direction from the mothership. Well, if the mothership's giving that direction, that should be in the SOI. Well, that's what we are.
Okay. And your microphone's still on, Claire.
We can be more specific in our feedback if that is what the council would like. This is this is your opportunity to provide us, as the shareholder, to provide us with the direction that you would like included.
Billy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for your presentation. The Māori Impact Statement highlights that CCOs have considerable potential to enhance Māori wellbeing and support the goals of Auckland Council. Among other key recommendations, Haukura continues to strongly advocate for the inclusion of a 5% Māori procurement target in AT's final SOI. It's tangible and a practical step that enhances the economic prosperity of Māori. Despite AT's response, we do not believe the rationale provided justifies a potential exclusion of this commitment. So, given the clear direction from Haukura, what specific steps will AT take to overcome potential internal barriers to ensure a clear pathway to achieving the 5% procurement target?
Auckland Transport provided some additional information about their Māori procurement program that supports that target. They point to particular success in the capital program work and have highlighted that they need to focus on more in the professional services area of procurement, which I understand that they are looking at in terms of their feedback on that request.
Okay, because, I mean, even as a guide, going over a 3-year period, going from 3 to 4 to 5 seems quite attainable, especially when we're over 3 already, heading actually towards 4, with the financial year for the organisation not yet complete. So I guess what we're asking is that incremental type, if you can't hit it on the first year, push the boat out a little and maybe go for 3, 4, 5. Is that doable?
That is what we are asking of them. It is for them to come back and comment on that.
Okay. It's a good informal pressure mechanism, so ka pai.
Okay, the next Brown, Mayor.
Okay. Just a quick one. I mean, the thing's 48 pages long, and it's sometimes easy to miss bits and pieces. And I've got to sign the damn thing. On point 22 of your report, Auckland Transport specific comments, it lists a lot of things which I think are what we want to have them taking place. Can you confirm that the 48 pages are in agreement with that, with most of those, or all of those, hopefully?
Yes, look, we looked at the letter of expectation against the draft statement intent and checked through that Auckland Transport had addressed the direction in the letter of expectations, and they broadly have. Where there more work is required or more emphasis required is picked up in the shareholder comments. For example, I note that point under point 3 around improving how they interact and listen to Aucklanders, and there's some feedback about asking for some more specific deliverables in that area to reflect their work.
Thanks. So I can sign this and feel comfortable that those are showing up in there somewhere or other. It's just got rather long now, and they used to be sort of a letter, but now they've become a book in which you have to hunt for clues. And I've missed some sometimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. I want to just come back with a supplementary following on from Councillor Williamson. And I ask it in the context of the award that you have just won as the team winner for CCO governance core projects. But I'm genuinely interested in terms of us at a governance level using all the tools in our toolbox to ensure accountability. Do you believe that what might be perceived as ambiguity around the TERP could be leading to a lack of clarity and further ambiguity? So I'm just trying to understand, and certainly as the mover of this, that we adopt it, whether you feel there are inherent weaknesses, because some criticise CCOs. I actually favour CCOs as long as we're using all the tools in the toolbox. So could you give us some guidance on those things that you feel we should be doing to prevent failure in terms of expectations?
I think with regard to, one of the keys to the success of the CCO model is council providing very clear strategic direction and the expectations that we want our CCOs to deliver. There is and has been debate around the TERP. I think we probably do need to be very clear, or shareholders need to be very clear what we are expecting Auckland Transport to deliver in that space. And maybe it might be more appropriate to invite Imran, who is, a bit more across that strategy than I am.
I would welcome that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Imran Rashid, Principal Transport Advisor, Transport Strategy, Auckland Council. Regarding your question about TERP, I totally agree with Councillor Williamson. This forum needs to give direction to Auckland Transport. What we understand from staff to staff collaboration is that there is funding constraints, the targets have been quoted as too ambitious. So if we want to add them into the SOI, the process should start with the Mayor's letter of expectation.
So in terms of guidance, if there was a majority today that was wanting to bring greater clarity to that, what advice would you be giving us?
Well, first of all, there needs to be political support and buy-in that these are the targets. So we need to go back to how TERP started. This was the response to Auckland's climate plan. So there is 46% of transport emissions that need to be reduced. And the way to achieve that was the TERP. So TERP is the answer to that. TERP tells you what needs to be true by 2030 and 2050 for us to be able to achieve that. Just to remind you all, it is still a council policy. We as staff of Auckland Council have to remind Auckland Transport at every given opportunity what needs to happen. When it comes to providing money for it, funding, that is this forum, political buy-in and clarity coming from the letter of expectation from the mayor himself, advising Auckland Transport that in your next year's SOI, you need to achieve this. And then we can have a discussion with Auckland Transport to explain where the money is going to come from or not, or at least we can provide further direction to AT and to you.
Has there ever been provided to, at a governance level, line-by-line items to give a full scope to the budgetary considerations if we were to give full support to the TERP within our statement of intent with Auckland Transport? Because if it's been given to us, the quantum, it hasn't come by my desk because I've looked for this on occasions. Are you aware of a breakdown of costs that would perhaps remove that ambiguity?
To the best of my knowledge, no, but I leave that with our finance people to answer. But at a staff level, the collaboration we've had with Auckland Transport, we have been advised quite categorically that the current funding environment does not allow Auckland Transport to achieve the objectives of the TERP. So just a reminder again, TERP is not a target-based document. It is a strategic direction that tells you what needs to be true if you want to achieve the objectives of net zero by 2050 and 64% reduction out of that 46% by 2030. So it highlights, it's a multifaceted approach. There is a lot of work that is already happening within Auckland Transport that is working towards achieving those goals. And what we as staff remind Auckland Transport all the time at every given opportunity is what best can be done within the money that is available. If there are specific funding constraints, I'll leave that to the chair of Auckland Transport and the CEO of Auckland Transport to come and talk to you about what are the funding constraints that they are facing, but that's the answer we've been given.
So while I understand it's aspirational, I'm also wanting very clear accountability from the boards of Auckland Transport and the performance of Auckland Transport more generally. And this seems to me an impediment in building a good relationship and trust. So I'm wanting advice from you how we can further advance, through our CCO model. How can we further advance this that it will satisfy? I mean, we might all have a different perspective around the table as to what we expect from our CCOs, but certainly in my expectation, I want to know with crystal certainty what they're going to be doing by way of performance. As we appoint board members, how do we evaluate the performance of our board members when we, from my perspective, personal perspective, there's inadequate information for me?
That's a great question. What I would suggest from my experience of working with Auckland Transport, this task from this forum needs to be given back to AT to develop an implementation plan and come back to this committee to say, this is where it needs to start, this is where the hurdles are, this is where the funding constraints are, this is where the lack of resources in terms of people capability is. And then when they present that analysis in front of you, then you can make a decision what is that you can do to help them. And if you can't help them, at least it is documented, it is registered, that this is not going to happen because of this, this and that.
I really appreciate your response.
Thank you. Daniel?
A couple of things. Yes, and good morning. And I do agree with trying to hold to the existing target for assets that are falling into disrepair. I think it's quite important that we do that. I'm reading from the board, Auckland Transport's board paper from the February this year. The cost of delivering the VKT reduction program was estimated at between 20.5 and 28.8 billion in capital, plus a further 1 billion annually in operating from 2036 onwards. Most of these costs were additional to the costs set out in the 2021 RLTP. I'm really struggling with how this whole conversation around the TERP has to be landed, because from what I can see, there is an argument that we have to continue to reference the TERP in the statement of intent, but there seems to be a tacit acknowledgement that it is an unfunded mandate, and nobody has come up with it. I mean, we can't even find $7 million around this table, apparently, for operating savings for major events, let alone the sort of operating and capital cost that would have to be funded for to meet the VKT reduction program. So are we conceding that Auckland Transport are going to have to be held to this reference of TERP because we've endorsed it, but we haven't paid for it? And we can have a conversation with Auckland Transport around how they're going to implement it, but we agree that they haven't received the funding, won't have the funding anytime soon, and quite possibly will never have the funding.
I think there are two things, as you allude to. One, it is council's policy, so we do need to require alignment with it. There are aspects of TERP that they are implementing and progressing, and so that can fit within that framework of please reference what you are doing and making it clearer. If we are not saying in our shareholder feedback in this letter that we would like them to meet the targets, but I do think there probably does need to be a conversation and maybe a paper coming back to this committee on the targets and how we as a council and with AT think we're going to make them or not make them, and some decisions around that to provide the guidance that is necessary.
I read further from that paper. The TERP still remains extant to the council as council direction, particularly as the council retains its overall objective of achieving a 50% reduction in Auckland's greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, including 64% reduction in transport emissions. But the same paragraph says that, however, the TERP implementation expectations also need to be seen in the context of other council decisions and directions, i.e. that we haven't funded it. So, and nobody's coming up with a budget to fund it, including some of the strongest advocates for it. So when do we have that conversation? When does that advice come back? Because I ask the same question of Mr. Leggett shortly. We just simply are putting this document on Auckland Transport desk and saying, this is a TERP. But that's it.
Yes, you are. That because it is still council policy. If you would like a paper or something further to come back to this committee for that conversation, that is your decision.
There'll be a discussion as to whether it goes to the policy committee or this committee. Next up, Richard, speaking of policy.
Thank you. I guess there's a lot of TERP denial or something going on. But the issue is, am I correct?
Point of order, I'd like to understand what TERP denial means and whether I'm part of that, because I think that the discussion that I've been participating in, I don't think I'm denying it, I'm just wondering how it's going to be funded. So I take some offence at the
Councillor
concept of denial.
Councillor
Yeah, wait, stop.
Yeah, if I clarified every barb you threw across the table. Yeah.
Mate, so what were you asking? You were asking a response to your question, Daniel?
Well, I take offence to the reference of TERP denialism immediately after me, because I'm not sure if that's a reference towards me, but I have great concern about the policy direction here. I'd like to see
This
it
is not a
implemented.
point of order, Chair.
Okay, well,
Yeah, let's just stay, we expect other people to abide by all the rules all the time, so let's just remain calm. Daniel, what is it that you were...
let him go, just have it.
Okay, so question, Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I didn't question the statements he was making about other councillors. The Transport Emissions Reduction Plan was approved by Auckland Transport before Auckland Council, wasn't it? Including endorsing TERP's 11 transport areas of focus for emissions reduction in Tamariki Makaurau. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So before we approved the TERP, Auckland Transport approved the TERP. We unanimously approved the TERP. 4 councillors voted against certain parts of that. Isn't that correct?
I would need to go back to look at the minute to check that.
And in those reports, we instructed, so on the paper, the council instructed Auckland Council and Auckland Transport to embed implementation of the transport emissions reduction pathway through these activities, blah, blah, blah. So at the moment, this is our policy. And if you go back to the minutes of Auckland Transport's policy. That
Correct.
And the 11 objectives, although we are not doing them as fast as we said, so if you go to them, supercharge walking and cycling, increase public transport, prioritise sustainable transport, reduce travel where possible, build up, not out, encourage low emissions public transport, efficient freight services. Those are all happening, just far slower than we would like. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that is why, as I have said, there is quite a lot of activity that we are doing to support TERP. It is just not articulated in that way currently, and I do think by asking Auckland Transport to reference it, it is actually bringing and highlighting that good positive work that is happening. There is debate around the level of funding and our ability to meet the target, but it is a pathway that that council has signalled it is on.
Thank you. And as part of the issue, because obviously I'm gutted about some of the targets in there, but and I know there's been discussion from councillors about funding, but my understanding is from the approvals through the post-GPS, which significantly reduced budgets in all these areas, we then put over $500 million of our funding in to 100% fund some of these projects, right? That's correct?
I would need our finance colleagues to confirm that, but that's my broad understanding. But
because I think, Chair, and I guess it's hard because it's not AT at the table, but there was one comment for the GPS would have meant our footpaths would not be upgraded for 300 years until we put 100% funding of some of that. So I guess isn't part of the issue the dramatic reduction in walking, cycling, public transport infrastructure in the GPS that is hamstringing us partially?
that is my understanding, yes.
And we did make some big calls by 100% funding over $500 million worth of additional projects.
As I said, I would need finance to completely confirm that, but
Plus the climate targeted rate.
yeah.
So I guess maybe it would be good to have a workshop on this, but I, Chair, have asked this committee and other committees throughout this whole term, okay, what exactly do people want? Because that is that confusing thing. The last question I'll have is, and I know it's Waka Kotahi Ministry of Transport, not us, but isn't the whole roads of national significance budget completely unfunded? Like as in every road that gets put forward? It's in our RLTP noted and it's in the NLTP, but as far as I know, there's no funding.
I'm not sure they can, so I get where you're going, but I'm not sure, this is not an SOI question, this is so let's bring it back to what we're doing.
But I'm just trying to understand that all projects through transport are technically unfunded until you move through the 10, 20 years to fund parts.
Yeah, and that's not a new thing. So that's swings and roundabouts, isn't it? So just before we move on, just had a request for electronic link for Joe Bartley. I'll move. Someone like the second. Thanks, Richard. Those in favour say aye. Against carried, so we can let her in. And so no more questions. And just remind everybody as to the resolutions up there that this is a part of a longer process, and the C is an interesting one where the staff are taking notes of things that are raised today. It'll go back. The mayor will write a letter. AT will respond formally. So, okay, so if you can step back, any debate? Okay, Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously I asked some questions about safety, but I did just want to add to those, mindful of C and the inability to really phrase those as a legitimate question. I think what we see in the next item, which is the quarterly update, is how focused there is on AT responding to what we put in the statement of intent, or what they put in their statement of intent. So these comments that we're sending back now as the shareholder to get that statement of intent right are really important. And the fact that we have so little in there at the moment on safety in their draft is of deep concern to me. We frequently have conversations at this committee and in workshops about how we want more focus on safety, concerns about deaths and serious injuries. And that plays out over a range of areas of activity for Auckland Transport, not just things that necessarily have a big flashing sign that says safety next to them. So I wanted to speak to reiterate that and make sure that that is captured in our shareholder comments, because otherwise we will get quarterly updates that do not address safety. And we just can't have that. As Councillor Darby pointed out, one of the core purposes of a transport system, moving people around safely, and that just absolutely has to be in there. I did want to make a quick comment on TERP because it has come up, and I think some of the discussion we've just had, I'll shorten my comments as a result. But I would note that TERP is also about processes, not just projects. And it's all very well to say that specific projects are unfunded, but actually a lot of the processes that we're seeking in terms of transformation in the way that AT works and in the way that other parts of council work, because it's not just a document for Auckland Transport, are changes to how we do business. And they don't necessarily... they may need a relatively modest budget to achieve that change. Transformation always costs a bit, especially in transition. But they're not, some of these are very small ticket items and things that are actually already underway, things that are funded by Qatar, that kind of stuff. And finally, we have repeatedly had advice that carrying through with TERP is cheaper than the alternative. That mitigation and adaptation to climate change is cheaper than actually just letting it rip. And so if we're going to talk about cost, if we're going to talk about things being unfunded, well, actually the damage of climate change to the future is seriously unfunded. And we don't even talk about it. So if we're going to be pedantic about the cost of TERP, let's be pedantic about the cost of not doing TERP as well. And I think we'll find which one is the smallest number by a significant margin, let alone the human cost of not doing that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Morris?
Yeah, look, I'm going to just stick to this one thing again. If you were the board of a large corporation and you said to one of your subsidiaries, here are your targets for 5 years out. I want you to achieve this, I want you to do that, I want you to deliver on this. Then one of the things you would have to say to them is, and the funding for that will be provided by. Because otherwise you'd be saying to a subsidiary a ridiculous target that the management would say, how the hell do we ever do this? and then you can hold them to account a few years later, say, well, we gave you a direction and you haven't done it. What a useless board you are. Now, I want to repeat what was agreed to on the 18th of August 2022. D, instruct Auckland Council and Auckland Transport to embed implementation of the TERP through all of their activities, including future updates to key transport planning and funding processes. And I've got some papers that I've now seen as a board member with the targets of what has been set for them. They're public as well. I think Daniel Newman ran a story in the Herald with some of them. But I'm going to repeat them again, and I want anybody who's prepared to take a bet on with me, you can make a fortune, because I bet you we can't come within 10% of some of the targets set. The idea that we're going to get a 50% reduction in vehicle kilometres travelled by the private motor car fleet in 4.5 years' time is la-la land. It is total la-la land. The fact that we're going to get a 550% increase in the use of public transport within 4.5 years is la-la land. The fact that you think we will get, let me give you this one, EVs, currently sitting at about 2.4% of the fleet, we'll have it to 32% of vehicle kilometres travelled by 2030. Not even close to what the current industry is predicting for sales or usage of. Not even like close, but not even on the same scale. And I literally cannot sit here and say, we're going to give one of our CCOs a set of directives that are absolutely impossible, we're going to fund none of it, and then we're going to say you're useless. You didn't deliver. There's more. Cycling and micro-mobility. Bike Auckland should know this. Currently at around 1%. TERP has it to 13%. That's a 1,300% increase in the use of cycling and micromobility in the next 4.5 years. You're dreaming. You are simply dreaming. So what we should be putting into a statement of 10 are goals that we think are achievable, and associated in the columns to that, the sums of funding that would be needed to do it. And then we would be able to hand on heart go out and say to the public, we've got a realistic plan for our climate change with regards to transport, and we put the necessary funding with it. Because targets like this with no funding are a pipe dream. And I've offered up several times to anybody who want to do it, I'll put 50,000 into a trust fund of a solicitor's account of your naming, and you do the same. And if we meet these targets in 2030, you will make 50,000 of the easiest dollars you've ever made. No one will take me up on it. No one, because you know that we're not going to meet these. You know that we're not even going to meet half these. So why don't we then step back a sec and say to AT, yes, we do want a TERP, but we want a realistic TERP that can be delivered within 4.5 years. Here are your new targets, and here is your funding. Because Councillor Darby made a good point about the bike numbers, which are decreasing in this, to do with funding. So if we are wanting the bikes to increase, then we should be saying this is how much increase we want, and this is how we will fund it. Because we are tying the hands behind their backs of an operation called Auckland Transport, giving them grossly unrealistic targets. And I don't mean grossly, I mean ludicrously unrealistic target. And then we will hold them. They'll come along with graphs one day showing the teeny-weeny percentage of progress they've made on those targets. And we're about to sit here and say, oh, you're hopeless, you're done, you failed to deliver. That's not the way to run a business. That's not the way to run an organisation. I plead with you, councillors, that we put realistic targets into an SOI, and we put the associated amount of funding. Now, we may need to, I think the best one would be, I think, Claire Gomez. We should go back to AT and said, we would like you to make a proposal of what do you think is realistic and the funding that would be needed to make that happen. Put the ball back in their court now, and then have AT come back to this committee, it's a transport committee, so back to this committee, and tell us if you really are serious about doing something towards climate change, then here's what you will need to do, or what we will need to, AT will need to do, and there's the funding you need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Billy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaking of goals that are achievable and realistic, Haukura, through the chair, formally requests that the procurement target of 5% be explicitly included in the final SOI as a matter of equity, accountability, and alignment with Te Tiriti obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela.
Thank you. Look, I agree with Councillor Williamson. I think there should be reference to the TERP in the letter of expectation. I'm not sure that we're going to have the time or we're going to be able to land on targets that everybody agrees on, but there should be a reference to it. Excuse me. We have a lot of strategies. We have a lot of strategies that are unfunded, but we have strategies that guide us in our decision making. And the decision of how to fund TERP is a political one. Politically, we decide not to. Politically, this particular term, we have not been able to fund it as much as we like because we do not have the GPS that matches it. It's a change in government. It has a different direction. We're not getting bang for our buck, so we can't invest as much as we would have. I have asked a number of times for TERP to be returned so we can debate it, so we can talk about it, so we can understand it as a strategy that it is. The strategy that sits alongside the Auckland plan and the climate action plan and every other strategy we have that are not funded, but that set a direction in every decision we make. And when it comes to picking on TERP, that's become a political football because of the targets in it that don't meet the needs or expectations of some of us. It gets too much negative attention for the wrong reasons. We have goals. We have goals that we've consulted on with Aucklanders. They have agreed with a climate action plan. They have agreed with how Auckland Council will fund its budget. We're the ones that decide what money we send to Auckland Transport. We decide not to fund the TERP as much as it needs to be funded. So bring the TERP back and let's just understand what it is. I think there's a general consensus on the direction. There's little agreement, I think, on the targets because they're unachievable, because we're not funding them, because we choose not to fund them. But to do nothing, to lessen it, to reduce the numbers, is not an option. It's just not an option because we will be telling Aucklanders that it doesn't matter enough. Within TERP, it's not just about emission reduction, it's about safety. There's a lot of stuff in TERP that isn't just about reducing emissions for those who do not appreciate climate change. Don't want to necessarily fund climate change because it's not important right now. I wish we could keep more of a focus on the generations that are coming, that we are the decision makers now for my grandchildren, for everyone else's grandchildren, and let's leave them with a bit of hope and a place where they can do things like ride to school, or road to school. It was a long time ago. People rode to school. At that point in time, you could ride without cycle lanes, without the protective barriers. That's not the case now. The city has grown so much. So the other thing I'd like to say about the funding, and that was my reference to the climate action targeted rate, we need every elected member to be on board. The Manurewa local board was given $14 million to put in a cycleway. They don't want it. They don't want it. We'll give it to another board perhaps if you don't want it. But how about your community? How about the people that do want to ride safely? Another bit of funding from central government that because of indecision and debating, another, I think, $17 million was turned down by that local board. That's over $30 million a local board turned down that would have contributed to safer streets, not just cycleways. Certainly the Qatar program was a cycleway. It said no. We need all politicians to be on board, whether you like cycleways, hate them, whether you like the thought of reducing emissions or not. It's not just about you, right here, right now. It's about the future. It's about the next lot of people coming through who want very different decision making to the decisions that we make at times. And more power to the people who might put their names up for election and get elected, as challenging as that may be when you're doing it on your own. But more power to them, so we can get a future direction for this city, the vision that we have for this city, which is to be prosperous, which is to be clean, which is to be able to be inclusive to everyone that lives here, continues to come here, how they wish to get around town, and how they can be more of a stronger social fabric, which is certainly what we're missing in all aspects of life in this country at this time. So back to the topic that we're here for today, I would like to see the TERP in the letter, a reference to it. I don't think we'll get to agree on targets between ourselves, let alone ourselves and Auckland Transport. But let's get it in there and let's bring it back and have a debate. I don't know if that happens before this election, but at some point in time, clear the air and get some accountability around the TERP. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken.
Thank you. I just want to have this letter of expectation or whatever it is match practical what's happening out in the communities. You know, I'm sitting here on the side of the road, a road I've travelled all my life. There's very little change to it, less parking, just the same number of cars, if not more, driving down it. But just in front of me, there is 5 vehicles, a whole bunch of guys, some diggers, no one with a shovel. The only thing that's carbon free is the shovel. We've got these targets, which they're unachievable. They're unachievable. It's like we're asking our staff to be a builder. We're asking them to build an optical illusion. It's impossible. And the pregnant pauses in this conversation where the staff will ask questions of how you're going to deliver, and they're just going, oh God. I'm not going to support this. Mr. Mayor, you're right about the 48 pages. There's good stuff in there, but there's bad stuff in there. But anyone who signs that document's going to be strung out and hung up to dry, because we're just not, we're going backwards on our targets because of other policies which affect us, like the health and safety policy, which is putting all the people up the road here. So I was just listening to this and I was thinking, I was trying to apply it to the reality that we're living in here on the street, and it doesn't. And the public want that too. Let's get it back on the table, like Councillor Dalton says at some stage, and let's try to get something that everyone. The reason there's no buy-in is they can't see any sense in it. So it's unachievable. It's just the elephant in the room. It's like listening to the Goon Show. I will be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne Brown.
Okay, I'm interested in Article B. I have to prepare a letter to be sent to Auckland Transport containing the shareholders' comments. Well, the shareholders' comments cover a whole rainbow of options from people who are pointing out that some of the expectations which were signed up before I was a mayor are probably undeliverable. We're in an economic climate where there is immense pressure and horrendous numbers of people behind in various payments. So I need a bit of guidance here. We almost need to have a big meeting about climate change and its impact, because climate change is here. I'm convinced of that. I mean, it's when I used to go surfing, in winter it made your hands cold when you put them in, and now it doesn't do that. I don't even wear a wetsuit anymore. up north has become tropical. People are pulling out, and this is real stuff, they're pulling out various crops that they've had to make their income and replacing with bananas. A big export honey producer, Manuka honey producer, approached me the other day. Manuka is now flowering all year long, which I thought sort of sounded good, but he said the trouble is there's no nectar. The avocados are not setting because it's not cold enough in winter. That shows that it is here, but on the other hand, there are other people in there who are wanting us to suddenly build up railway lines by 2 metres. Now that's thousands of years away. I've just looked at the CRL, which they've spent a hell of a lot more money than they need to for things that aren't going to happen in 50 years and may never happen. So I need some guidance. What am I going to tell these guys? We're going to spend a whole lot of money we can't get out of ratepayers because they're in trouble to fix a whole lot of things which and deliver things which people's behaviour isn't going to change until they get a fright. If suddenly petrol goes to $20 a litre, we'll be on bicycles. But we're not going to get it by asking them to go on bicycles. It doesn't seem to happen. And so I need a bit of guidance. I've been tough on AT for quite a lot of things, but I'm not going to get tough on them for asking them to do things which are we are unable to support financially, and which the public aren't going to get on and do. But do we ask for the government to whack up the price of petrol to $20 a litre? That'll do the trick. But I don't think they'll be the government for terribly long. I can't even get them to add 2.5% of the cost of a hotel room to provide a bit of fun for us. So I need a bit of guidance here, because that thing there is going to be a hell of a long letter with all sorts of things. Some of us want to do this and some of us want to do that. Ken, who's often confused, is probably right at the moment to be confused. And so I'm not sure. How the hell do I do B? There you go. It's a question for everybody.
Okay, Shane.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I wasn't going to speak actually, but you're a bit alarmed by some of the comments and some of the direction of where things are going. So, look, I think we here know the facts around climate change. There's facts that it's a climate emergency. It's a fact that we need to reduce our emissions and we need to do all we can for our next generation of Aucklanders to actually live in the same level of quality of life that we have. So these are where these targets came from initially. For those of the people that were around here talking about the TERP when it came through, we were doing that based on facts, not politics, not emotions or strongly held opinions, but facts. I've heard here we're going backwards in our targets, and that is why we should reduce the targets. Well, come on. Where's political accountability in that conversation? What is the role? We should be doing what we say we're going to do, and doing right by not just by present Aucklanders, but future ones. If the talk is implementation plans, I'm all for that, but I want that to be grounded in reality, not in politics. TERP was always intended to be woven in as part of a policy document, like any other policy document, to be referenced and to be used in different plans and places and things like that, and that's common stuff. I've heard about the cost of the TERP. I'll just point out the Road of National Significance budget alone is $32 billion. That's not to mention ongoing OPEX for the taxpayers. That's not to mention the ongoing climate costs, which will probably dwarf that, associated with induced traffic demand. So to those that are concerned the targets are too high, that surprises me, because I would be very surprised to hear those same people upset that AT have then not achieved the targets. Haven't heard that one yet. Haven't heard, oh, you should be doing more for bus patronage, you should be doing more for cycling and walking. Haven't heard that one. That would be a welcome first. I'd also remind people of the old saying that if you aim for the stars, you might hit the moon. We should be aspirational and we should be demanding more, and we may or may not achieve the target. I hope we do, but if we don't, we've at least made a better city in the process, have we not? We need aspirational goals to meet the challenges of the climate emergency for our city.
And as I say 100 times, to hold our heads up high when we're looking back in our time in public office, talking to the kids and grandkids and all that kind of stuff, that I did the right thing by them. Think of apparently it's a bad thing that we want to be raising cycle counts and walking counts and public transport patronage. Think of a city where we actually did that, where we actually met those goals, or even if we did half of that. Imagine how much less traffic congestion there would be for those that actually do drive. That'd be great. Think of the air quality that we would have. Think of the quality of life that we would have if everyone took more active modes or more public transport, which is the goal of all of this, right? And if money is the issue, then that's a political decision. That's for us to own, isn't it? It's not for us to then reduce targets. So what I'm not going to agree to in this conversation in a million years is the notion that we should set our targets not in reference to the actual needs of the city, but to short-termism and to political appetites, which has been the story of the city for decades in the past. We should be stopping that, and we should be doing what the city actually needs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, look, interesting. I wasn't going to speak to the totality of remarks, but I think I will. I hope that my colleague sitting to my right is going to furnish us with the savings that we're going to require to implement some of this, but that's what's going to be required here. Otherwise, the TERP will continue to be something which cannot be implemented, and that's what Auckland Transport is having to grapple with. The minute from that meeting in February, the board received the paper on the background to the TERP and its current status. Management confirmed a report is being developed on Auckland Transport's current performance against a 64% emissions reduction contribution, along with recommendations on what can be achieved within the available funding envelope. I think it hasn't been about so much about the targets today, Mr. Chair. It's been about show me the money. How does that get paid for? And I think that, Your Worship, if you're looking for clarity around this, I think what Councillor Williamson has said is right. The letter should be to Auckland Transport. We've set you this unfunded mandate. Can you please give us clarity as to what your best guess can be as to what you can achieve? And what's the difference? And then it's up to us as the shareholders to work out if we are prepared to fund the difference or not. I don't think that we actually have identified $1 of savings or reprioritisation so far for a $7 million events budget, let alone the sort of figures that we're talking about for the operational implementation of the TERP. That's over and above the CapEx. CapEx $20 to $28 billion and $1 billion annually for the implementation. And I do want to, if I may, Your Worship, just thank you, because I'm very disappointed that the Manarewa Local Board has been referenced here today, and I would encourage any councillor sitting around this table to phone the chair if they have an issue with any decisions that the chair or any members of the board might have taken. But you, Your Worship, have been gracious enough to be reaching out and having those discussions with the local board chairs, including the chair of the Manarewa Local Board, and that's great. If people have a concern about the local board's decision making, well, the local board's going to be here next week, and we shall see who will be here to talk to Matt about those issues. I suspect it might be a different narrative. Finally, Mr. Chair, can I just say that Auckland Transport, if anything, that I do not want them to move on with respect to a target, is the condition of the assets. It's very important that we don't slip on the condition of the assets. I don't think that there is going to be any sort of social licence from any Aucklander for that. I admit that that's going to be difficult to be able to hold the line, because that comes up with a funding consequence which is not being addressed properly by NZT. I get that, but I do think that that target needs to be met, and I do implore the Board of Auckland Transport to try and achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne?
So I'd like to put an amendment up first, Mr Chair, before I speak. It'll be seconded by Councillor Lee, and the amendment reads, request Auckland Transport and Auckland Council staff to report to this committee what it believes are realistic measures they can implement and their associated emissions targets, and how they can be delivered and how they will be funded. Good. Now, I'll speak to that now, Mr Chair, if that's appropriate. What is clear, and other speakers have spoken to this, such as Councillor Williamson, is that the present measures are not realistic. They cannot be met. I'd suggest there's an almost impossibility there. Meeting them requires not just funding and measures on the part of council, but they also require funding and measures on the part of the government. So that goes to implementation. It's critical that we are able to implement. That's critical. Targets. It's clear that we need very real definition around what the targets are. And that is something that I raise on an ongoing basis, because often something around reducing emissions is put up, but we actually have no idea, pragmatically, as to what those emissions are. And sometimes emissions aren't even achieved. So the targets are critical, and so is delivery. That is critical. One of the concerns that I have right now is we have these measures, and there may well be unintended consequences. We may actually invest too much into one project that is delivering emissions, and as a consequence, pragmatically, not balance it out across other parts of the network where we need to reduce emissions. This council and Auckland Transport have a responsibility to a network. When somebody travels from A to B to C to D, it's the whole trip that counts. It's the amalgamation of all sorts of trips across the network. So what follows, if we've got limited budget and we can only achieve so much, that we have to take a pragmatic approach, and that's what this amendment covers off. And lastly, how they will be funded. Now that is crucial, and we should have some realism about that, and I don't have to repeat the comments that other councillors have made. So there is some urgency around this. Just as an aside on my part, in the first term of council under Len Brown, I led out the climate strategy. That was an effective strategy. It actually had a roadmap that was quite detailed across all manners of transport. I went to Rio climate talks at no cost to council. I funded myself to the Paris climate talks. If ever there was someone around this table that has been committed to these issues for decades, that is myself. So I think that this is a pragmatic way to actually achieving and generating some realism. And I would hope that any councillor that looks at it and reads the parts of it recognises that it's actually really important. We need reporting from Auckland Transport about this and officers, and we actually need it now. Otherwise, we're sending a message out to Aucklanders that is entirely misguided. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Point of order, Mr Chair. There's some syntax problems. The Secretariat have added Auckland Council into the original resolution that I sent over. If you're going to have that, then in the second line it's got to be they believe rather than it believes, because you've got two organisations now. So on that second line it's got to be they believe, yeah.
I think the mover and seconder is comfortable with that, Mr Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So Mike, as seconder, do you want to speak to it now?
Briefly, Mr Chair. I think in the circumstances, this is timely and realistic. There's nothing wrong with aspirational goals, but they have to be feasible. So the goals need to be feasible, and that means that would require some benchmarking with other PT cities to see what is actually feasible. This doesn't let Auckland Council off the hook, because I think our leadership in terms of, let's say, public transport has been pretty poor, really. We've sat here year after year listening to the reports every month from AT and asking, soft questions and then moving on. We should be giving a lead to AT, but there's a difference between giving a lead on goals and objectives that are feasible and comparable to other public transport operations in what used to be called the comparator cities in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, and so on. There's a difference between that and being a bit delusional, and that can easily happen. The objectives, the inspiring objectives, can be taken as a kind of reality. And I have to say, in one of my early board meetings in Auckland Transport, in my second term, if you like, or third term on the board of that worthy organisation, I was listening to a briefing from one of the managers, and this person said, not once but 3 times, and this is back in late 2022, we are moving people out of the private car and into active mode cycling and on public transport. And at the third utterance, I had to intervene and say, no, we're not. No, we're not at all. And obviously, if you look at the next item on the agenda, you can see the measure of failure here. So I think this is a useful amendment. It means that we listen to a rigorous assessment from AT. That doesn't mean to say AT can stay in its current comfort zone when it comes to, for instance, PT, which is well behind other cities in terms of recovery. We're still way off what we were back in 2019 in terms of public transport usage, and yet the OPEX cost of public transport, has gone from 500 million to 700 million, which is just absolutely non-sustainable over the long term, and that's another matter altogether. So I'm happy to support this amendment, Mr. Chair, and I think interaction between this council, this committee and AT over what are feasible goals, because we should not just enable AT to slip into a comfort zone. We should be aspirational. That's different from being self-delusional. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion on the amendment? Julie?
Kia ora. Yeah, I actually support this amendment and will be voting in favour. I just want to add, and I don't think it needs any words, but I just want to speak to that part of realistic measures should also be the cost of not undertaking those measures, and we have previously had some advice on that. And so I'm anticipating that that's the expectation here, that part of the consideration we always have is the do nothing option, and we need to know the cost of do nothing as well. So I will be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wish to foreshadow that in supporting this, I'm very happy as the mover for this to be incorporated into the main motion. I can't for the life of me believe why anyone wouldn't support this. It's just so incredibly sensible. But in speaking, and I only want to speak once in this overall discussion, but I have actually felt really saddened because I think somehow we've polarised this issue. It's all about the moral high ground, who's doing the most and who's... so there's been this emotional factor that's been brought in. And whether it was the intention of some of the speakers or not, I've actually taken great offence today because if I go back in my history as the chair of the Transport and Environment Select Committee in Parliament, along with Helen Hughes, who was the then Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, I oversaw the inquiry that actually looked into establishing with evidence that there was climate change occurring and that we could actually take some remedial steps in terms of retreat, in terms of what we were consenting, long before what we're trying to fix up now. So I am not a climate change skeptic. And for those of you who think somehow you love your mokos more than I love mine, I have 7, and I care about my grandchildren just as much as anybody sitting around this table, and I want them to have a bright future. I want them to live in a functional environment. So could we please just somehow modify this unhelpful emotional undertone that is here for, well, certainly myself. I am no climate change skeptic, but what I am interested in is how can I use the role that I have in governance to be more effective in my response to it. I am really interested in CCOs. I am really interested in the functionality of the CCO model, and I think that if we were to adopt D, or if it's incorporated into the main motion today, it will give a lot in terms of credibility on what we're signalling. Because if I was on the board of AT, and I have been in the past, I would get really confused about what I was supposed to be prioritising. Is it the infrastructure for electric ferries? Is it getting the grade separation going for the CRL? Because that's going to do a heck of a lot. Is it? I mean, I could go on and on and on in terms of the list that AT directors must be grappling with at the moment and management. So I think the Mayor is right. We need to show some leadership on this. It's a real conundrum for us. And it does, and I see that we have the chair of the Budget Committee online. This has significant budgetary ramifications. So let's try and bring it into the open. Let's bring a bit of honesty to this. You know, if we're wanting to establish what our priorities are, then we should be unafraid of actually having a really open and transparent conversation on what the priorities should be for Auckland Transport. So, Chair, I'm sure that the seconder of, and she's indicating her support, this could be incorporated into the recommendations today, and I just hope that all of the members of this committee can support it.
We're just working that out as we go.
Also, just while I had the floor, could you give an indication of when you're planning to take a break? Because I certainly would like to have a 5-minute break shortly.
Well, we were sort of trucking along. I thought we'd take a break at the end of the item for lunch because we are 12:15 as we speak. So that's if we can. There's a spur for people. Chris Darby.
I want to get some clarification on realistic measures. Which measures are we referring to for the motion mover or the seconder? Which measures particularly are we referring to?
I really don't think we need to give direction to Auckland Transport around that. We've got Mr. Kimpton in the room. I'm sure he understands what and the...
No, I'm actually asking you. You wrote the words. I'm asking you what measures you're referring to. the realistic measures? Because there's a range of measures.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I really don't think it's appropriate to go down this rabbit hole where various councillors go through some sort of inquisitorial response to a mover.
I can provide a bunch if you want.
Hang on, so Deputy Chair's just made a very sound, and so for us to incorporate this into, and so let's take a 5-minute break so that we can wordsmith this, get everything up. We can then resume with, and so, because I wasn't listening, I was fluffing around the top of the rabbit hole, so talking about how we move this around, so I didn't hear what your question was. So let's take a 5-minute break.
Just before you do,
we'll come back.
just before you do, so can we take account of motion C? Motion C encompasses all the questions and discussion that's been raised here today. That's the way it's worded, and it's for Barry and his team to then distill that. So does not this just get captured in the C anyway, Chair?
So yes, and so the process is, Chris, is that the room has to agree if we are going to move this amendment into the main body of the motion to ostensibly make it D. If the room doesn't agree, and so if that's you, but again, we'll take a 5-minute break, we will get that, people can have a chat, they can have a discussion what they want to do, then when we come back, we will progress along. So that's what we're doing.